I guess just first of all, when did you first become aware of Publicists? I guess at that point maybe they were referred to as public relations specialists or flax, or when you were when did it first cross your radar that there was such a person?
First, I think that when I got into it, which was in New York, most publicists back then were referred to as press agents.
Press agents.
And because the culture there was primarily for all legitimate theater and other such thing, although my initial involvement was with a small agent, one-man agency who hired me. And I was the writer for the agency. And he represented a couple of radio celebrities, I guess, and handled some restaurants. And so it was that kind of office. It was not exactly a big glitzy office. As a matter of fact, I'll give you the anecdote as to how I got to that.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I mean, until that moment, I was aware of Publicists, but had absolutely no idea what they did. Had no idea what publicity was really all about. I was a wannabe writer. I was going to write a great American novel. And while I was doing this, I worked at the New York Public Library in the theater collection, it so happens. And and as a lot of wannabe writers did, the library was very good this way, would take on young writers, and they'd pay us, starvation wages. I earned enough money in 1 week to live 2 weeks. And so I always had to figure out how to cover that second week. And the way we did it at the library, which is a culture that existed long before I was around, is that when people needed research done, they knew that the librarians, although I was more of an assistant librarian, I was very young, but sitting at a desk, when people come up and ask questions, that sort of thing. Well, those of us who were there, somehow or other the word, would kind of move around that this guy's really a writer. So people would come up and ask us to do research for them. They'd pay us. Little, but they'd pay us. And it was invaluable because that's the way I'd make enough money to eat that second week. And one of the people that I did this for was a New York Times columnist by the name of Sam Zolotow. It was kind of a semi-regular gig. What I would actually do for Sam is on the way to work, the library is located at 42nd and 5th, and the New York Times is located, at that time I think it may still be there, but in 42nd, around 42nd or 41st Street, east of Broadway. So on my way to work in the morning, I go to Sam's office. He obviously got a lot of press releases. And there'd be a batch of press releases that he had on the side there that he had not looked at. And my job was to take some of those releases, take them with me, and I would, hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And I would look through them. It was not a matter of editing them, but just read them. And he wanted me to separate the ones that I thought may have some be of interest from the ones that I did think. It was actually more dumping the ones that he was not interested in, not dumping them, I put him aside. And then at lunch, or before the day was up, I'd go back to his office, 2 separate bunches, give him that. And I'd make something like $8, sometimes $10 a week. I mean, usually under $10 a week doing that, but it was invaluable.
And this would have been around what year?
This was a long time ago. This was in the late 40s, around early, just around 1950.
And you were at that point, would you have been in your teens, or would you have been?
I'm not going to admit.
No, you don't have. I don't mean it that way. I'm sorry.
No, but I was very young. Let's put it that way. And that's what I would do. And the way he actually, I got to him, or he got to me, is that we publicists, young librarians at the library, were in the theater collection. were invited to Broadway show openings.
Really?
And the reason they did it was kind of smart by publicists, by the way. You know, the show publicists would invite us because what our role was is we'd go to see the show, and then after every opening performance, there'd always be a reception. And then we'd be invited to the reception, and there'd be 2 or 3 of us at a given opening. And we'd be there and we'd start chatting, you know, about the play, or engage people who were there about the play. Never say anything negative about it. If it was a real lousy performance, we'd find something interesting about it to talk about rather than how lousy.
And that was your chart. That was in return for going.
And the reason that we went, aside from the fact that I love going to the shows anyway, was the reception. Because again, it was an opportunity. I mean, I feasted at the reception. You know, that was the appeal.
Right.
And that's where I met Sam Zolotov.
Okay.
And that's when he said, and he knew all about us. I mean, he knew exactly what our situation was. And so he said, hey, if you want to, come by my office. I might give you a few little things that you can do for me.
And he was specific to theater publicity?
No, he had a column. It was more movie oriented.
Oh, okay.
He would periodically, but it was a column. It was not. He didn't write a feature story. He'd write items about movies, some plays too. But it was a very popular column at the time.
Wow.
And so anyway, so that's where I got that gig.
Right.
So in any event. I did this, and I depended on him. He was my one. I had picked up little things here and there, but Sam was my one regular thing. And if he didn't call me, he'd have to call me and say, come by and pick it up. If he didn't call me, you know, and the week was passing by, I'd drop by there. I'd say, Sam, don't you need something done, you know? And I did this often because he didn't need me that much. And I, you know, saying, I've got to get that $9 if I'm going to eat this week. So I bug him, you know, I go, Sam, are you sure? You know, I come, are you sure you don't have this? And he finally got kind of disgusted by this. And he says, listen, kid, I'm going to find you, you need a paying job. You know, that's what you need. I'm going to find you a paying job. And when I do, if you don't take it, it's over with us, you know. And I would yes him because I had no ambition to get another job because this was the idea. I was writing every night, every moment other than working there, and I earned enough money. So.
And what sorts of things were you writing independently?
I was writing a book at the time, and I'd been working on it by the time I met him. I'd probably been working on it for months, months. And I had a mentor, who kind of oversee what I was doing and all this. But nevertheless, I was writing, it was going to be the next big book.
Right.
Because I was sweating, I was determined. And I had, as I say, a poet was one of my mentors.
Yes.
Who was teaching me about the importance of not only the use of the right word for any given situation, but even the spelling of words, how important it is. And so I would spend hours just making sure every time I'd write I don't know, 2 paragraphs, and I keep on going over them because he told me that the way to find out whether you have gotten what you really need for that particular portion is when you can't improve it anymore, and you have to really work at it to improve it. Once you can't do it anymore, that's fine, go to the next thing, but that's the thing that you do, or keep on writing and then you have to go back and rework it and so on. Anyway, the point is that that's what I wanted to do. I was willing to starve to do that. And I was a bit of a bohemian, and it was the time of the bohemians in New York. So in any case, I bugged him enough and all this, and he told me, I'd find you a job, you're going to have to take it, and I didn't believe that he would, and I knew he was never going to find me a job that I want.
Right.
He calls me up one day, and he says, come by. I came by, expecting to pick up some stuff. And he did give me a few things to do. And he says, give me a slip of paper. He says, the name of the guy and a phone number. You call him, he's got a job for you. And I said, what's the job? He says, he'll tell you, but it's a job. So I called the guy up, and tells me where to meet him and all this, and I'm meeting him on a sidewalk. I'm not even meeting him at an office. He's telling me to meet me on 48th Street, between here and there, and I'll meet you on the sidewalk. So I go there and meet him. This nervous little guy shows up, really nervous. And he looks at me and he says, Henry? I said, yeah. He said, wait here. And he goes into a restaurant. We're meeting in front of a restaurant. He goes in and I see this little window and he's talking to one of the guys there. Motioning, whatever. He comes out. He said, oh, let's go down the street. So we walk down the street and chatting about nothing. Comes to another restaurant, he says, wait here, I'll be right out. He goes into the restaurant and he's doing the same thing there. And he comes back out and says, come on in. He said, we're going to have lunch. And he says, you haven't eaten yet. You haven't had lunch, right? I said, no. Okay, great. He says, so we sit at a table, we look at a menu, and he says, order whatever you want. And I'm looking, I'm trying to be decent about it. I'm not going to order the most expensive thing, but trying to decide what to finally order something. And he doesn't order any food. I'm ordering, he says, have some soup, have some, the entree, and whatever you want. Have lunch, that'd be great. And we walk out after lunch. Keeps on saying, have more or more, whatever. We're walking out, and he hasn't even mentioned a job, I'm not disappointed. And we're walking down the street, and he turns to me and he says, so when can you start? I look at him and said, start what? You need a job, right? He said, Sam told me you were looking for a job. I got a job. I said, what would I do? He said, wait a minute, Sam told me you were right. I said, yeah, but what do you do? And he said, I'm a press agent. Listen, I need somebody to write press releases. And Sam says, you know how to do that. I've never written a press release in my life. So anyway, I said, what does it pay? At that point, I was making like $90, I think, under $90 a week, at the library. And so he says, looks at me like a little suspiciously, and he said, 200. I said, 200? For what? How long? He said, 200 a week. I said, and then he looks at me like I'm puzzled, I'm in shock. And he said, listen, 250, I cannot go above 250. I didn't know what to say, it's more than 2.5 times, or more than 2.5 times what I'm making.
Right.
But the short of it is that I took the job. And I started, and I told him that I wouldn't start that because I didn't want to give up my job at the time. So I went to the curator of the department and told him what would happen. And he says, you take that goddamn job. He says, as a matter of fact, I don't believe it. So here's what you do, don't quit this. Go to work, tell him you could start right away. And every morning, come by here, you have to sign in at the library. You sign in here, come back every afternoon, sign out. When you get your first check and you can cash it, then you quit. So that's what I did. I did the first check, and my gosh, you cash. So in any event, but when I worked for this guy, when I very first time, I come into the office and he says, okay, I want to do a press release. It was on one of the radio clients. So I want you to do a press release, and here's the information, and I'll put it together, see what it reads out. And I wrote it, and I really didn't know much about formatting the release, but anyway, I wrote it. And he looked at it and says, great. He says, okay, I'll take it to whoever at the time you hand-planted everything. And he comes back to me after he's gone to plant this release with a couple of people. He says, you're a fucking genius. I said, wow. Because usually he couldn't write, he couldn't put two words together. When he did that himself, and he was a great pitch man. And they loved him, and the comics loved him, but they could never, they would have to take the information and give him, and then figure out how they'd do a little bit of an item or whatever. So when I gave him this press release and he showed up there, it was the first time that I'd ever seen anything from him that was halfway literate. And they loved it. I said, well, great, what happened? And he said, well, I got this kid working for me. I said, oh, it's great. They didn't keep him. So anyway, so he thought I was a genius. Well, nobody had ever said from when I was writing books, nobody had ever even said anything close to being a genius. You know? All they could do is say, well, here's how you can improve it.
Right,
you know?
right.
And so I realized at that time that at that moment, I thought, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm a genius at this, and the others, I keep on hearing all this crap.
Right.
So I was bit
From that point forward.
and and I've been a publicist ever since.
Wow, that's great.
So anyway, so that's where I got into it.
Yes.
Okay. Now, back then there were the Broadway presses were the legendary ones, and so I got to meet more. I'd met quite a few of them before, but now that I was in the business.
Who were some of the biggest ones?
Well, let's see. There was. You have to try. I may have to recall it.
Right.
Right. Come up with the names. Sabinson. Harvey Sabinson was one of them. I have to think of some of the
These
others.
are the press agents that were
They were Broadway press agents.
Broadway press agents.
Right.
Okay.
And these were the people who had, like this guy, had, like the real press agent, like Harvey Sabinson, he knew Walter Winchell well. He knew Earl Wilson well. He knew, the big columnists of the day. They knew them well, and they could call up and say, I'm going to write them. And the columns at that time by these, legendary columnists, they wrote the first hunk of their columns, which had the big news of the day. Then they had like assistants, but they were the backroom guys, that one or two of them, each one of them, who wrote the items, the rest of the columns. You'd have to gather them.
Right.
So Harvey Sabinson was the kind of a guy who'd pick up the phone and get Wilson or Winchell on the phone. The guy that I worked for couldn't get either one of those guys, but he knew the guys who wrote
For them, yeah.
the bottom half.
Yeah, the bottom.
The first half of the column, these guys would write the day before. Was the next days, if it was a morning paper, the next morning column or the next afternoon column were written the day before. The items below, they would collect 2-3 days ahead of time.
Okay.
And because they put that one together so that at the last minute, Winchell could turn in his thing and be ready for publication. So anyway, so he wrote usually, he never got to, in the months that I was in, he never got anything in Winchell at the top, but he would get below.
Yeah.
Now, aside from which was another kind of part of the culture, is that he had a relationship with the bottom guys.
Yeah.
He'd call them up very often, because he always had to hustle clients. He never held on clients for too long. He'd call up one of the columns and the guy that he knew, and he'd read him the items that would appear 2 or 3 days ahead of time. So he knew certain items were going to appear. The day that he met me, he had been given the item on the restaurants. There were items in one or the other columns on each of those restaurants. And what he was doing, he went to those restaurants and he'd say, I want to handle your publicity or whatever. Do you already have a press agent?
Yes.
And if they didn't have a press agent, he said, look, a freebie, let's do it if you want to. He says, I'll get you in Winchell or Earl Wilson. And when it breaks, I'm going to put it in there. When it breaks, we have a deal. So that's what he was doing. And he knew that first restaurant that had an item in one of those columns.
Yeah.
And he went to pitch the owner, and the owner must have known what he was up to, and he threw him out, basically. He went to the next one where we actually set an 8, and the guy said, you get me in that column, and we got a deal. And so he knew we had a deal.
That's great.
So that was what was really going on back then. That was a guy that I was introduced to publicity, and it was really a lot of fun because this guy survived that way. He was a planner. He was a guy who thought quickly on his feet, and it was fun to see it. But, first, the clients that he had, he would kill for, but he would kill to get another.
Yeah, right.
Because he knew he was going to lose a guy. So and I didn't want to stay with it, but I really had a lot of fun.
And that's how you got your foot in the door.
Exactly. And the guys, once they got to know me, some of the same columnists who called me because now they saw that some decent copy was coming out, but I really didn't know what I was doing. They'd give me tips. They'd say, "Oh, Henry, here's what I love the item and all this, but it's a little long and this and all that. If you could write it so I could just use it, it would even be better."
Right.
And so I was there about 8 months, and they taught me the tricks of the trade.
That's great. That's great. So, I guess if you had to boil it down, what do you feel the job of a publicist, and particularly an entertainment industry publicist, is? What is the heart of the matter, the crux of the matter?
First, let me preface what I'm going to say by telling you that one of the problems that we publicists have is that, first, the vast majority of people have absolutely no idea what we do or how we do it. And the people who do know something about what we do and how we do it are usually wrong.
Yeah.
And also because there are no two publicists who do whatever they do alike. We all handle it and you kind of feel your way, and we all have different ideas as to what makes a good publicist. I've worked with publicists who have had them as partners. I had one particular partner who was a fantastic business getter. Also couldn't put two words together, but he was an unbeliever. We never had a meeting with prospective client that didn't walk out with that client. So to the point where whenever we considered a meeting, I would sit down with him and all this says, do we want it?
Yeah.
On what basis or why do we want it? Because I don't want to take a meeting and get the client and then come back here and say we don't want it.
Right.
I don't want to do that to them, and I don't want to do it to us. So there are people like that. And that some of them, I love working with those guys because they're really terrific idea people. They just can't write.
Right.
You have those kinds of publicists. You have others who are magnificent writers and couldn't sell their way out of the paper bag, but they do whatever they do well. So they're totally different individuals who approach it differently. The talent, if you will, the talents or the skills, let's put it this way, that publicists need are multiple, and they're even now, just exploding as to what we really need to know. But basically for the craft, you first have to recognize that you have to kind of see the idea in any given project that will cause somebody that you don't even know to react, to respond to it. And so you have to see that in everything that you do, because that's how you're going to structure your press releases. That's how you're going to do everything that you do is based upon that ability. So it's important for people who want to be publicists to appreciate that. You have to understand that that's what it is. From a standpoint of an employer, let's say, or a client, they have to understand why they're hiring a publicist. In entertainment, the key to succeed in show business, period, is for an actor, for a producer, for anybody, is to do something that will attract an audience. Without an audience, show business does not exist. You can have the greatest whatever it is, like on paper, on wherever, and greatest thing, and you do it, and nobody gives a damn. It's not going to succeed. Regardless of how talented the people are, that's what it means. So the smart actor or the smart producer who believes that they have the talent to do some worthwhile things have to understand that, hey, that's not enough. Now I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get an audience to come and see. That's where the publicist comes in. Figuring out how you will attract an audience. And this has been true forever. There was a thing that might be interesting for your part of the culture of Hollywood. When I came to town here, which was back in the 50s, the first job I got was at KTLA, also by a fluke, because I came in town, it was a last minute decision to come here, and I never want to go back. And so
what made you decide to come here?
My sister,
Yeah.
who is an artist, and at that time had been a teacher, a fashion design teacher, and had been brought out here by Paramount as possibly going to work with Edith Head or whatever.
Oh, wow.
So she was here, and she had said, "Oh, how wonderful it is here," and all this, and I love it. And so I came out. I'd been in the service, and so right after I came out, that's when she was here. I flew out on the worst winter day in New York, in October,
Right.
like October 14th.
Right.
The worst October day that New York had ever seen. Snow, everything was terrible. But I managed to take off. I came here and it was like this.
Yeah.
It was gorgeous. So I determined, I never went back. I decided to stay, but then I had to find a job. So I started through a friend of mine, strategy on how to do it, and I'd take meetings and stuff. I didn't have a car, so I had to get around town.
And this, you were looking for public relations related things?
Yeah, oh yeah. Because I knew I was that sort of thing. So when the way I got that job is I'd gone to KTLA was one of the places I kept on going. Trying to get a job. I came about third visit there. The guy who was the publicity director, there was only one person in the whole department, but it was him. He was not there that third time I came. And he shared an office with the head of sales. And so I was sitting there waiting for him to come back.
Yeah.
And this head of sales says, who are you waiting for? I said, I'm here for a meeting with Howard Wormser, and he didn't expect me, so he's not here, but I'm going to wait till he comes back. He said, well, what do you do? I said, I'm a publicist, and I'm trying to see whether he might have a job.
Yeah.
And he says, I'll tell you what, if you're a publicist, this is a press release written. Can I give you the information you do? I don't know whether Howard's going to have time or whatever it is. Oh, no, I'll be happy to. So he gives me the information, I go. Takes about 15 minutes or whatever.
You did it while you were there?
Right, I wrote it right there. And I walked in and gave him the press release. He looks at it and he says, that's pretty damn good. And he said, so you're looking for a job? I said, yes. He said, you got a job. I said, wait a minute, I thought Howard was head of the department. He is, but he's leaving. So, your timing couldn't be better. And you can write a press release, you got the job.
That's great.
And that's where I got the job. So in any event, the first job, was that at KTLA, and it was a fantastic job for me, especially since it turned out to be I was the only guy doing it. And I retained friendships there. I don't know whether the name of Stan Chambers means anything to you. He was an on-camera news guy.
Yeah.
He was there when I was there. We remained friends throughout.
That's great.
But in any event, so it worked well, and I was coming up with things. It was fun because I had free hand, and the head of the station was a mad German genius. He was one of the geniuses behind the evolution of television.
Oh.
He's the guy who invented the remote truck. Landsberg.
Well, I can look it up.
Yeah, well, I'll find it. Klaus Landsberg.
Klaus Landsberg. And
he's the guy who invented the remote. He did the first telecast of the atomic explosion out in the desert.
Oh, wow.
The only one. I mean, nobody else knew how to do that.
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of thing. But a guy who actually ran the station physically under him, because he was a genius, he was over here.
Yeah.
The other guy did it. Was a young guy, maybe a year or two older than I. And so we became close friends. And so I did all kinds of stunts and whatever. They loved it. And so it led to my getting a job at an agency.
Which was that?
It was an agency called Clary Strauss and Irwin, which was one of the boutique agencies. And the reason I'm leading up to that, because of the topic, is the three guys were probably three of the most respected PR practitioners in town at the time. Separately, they just happened to get together.
So, what were their names again? The full names?
Chip Cleary,
Yeah.
who had been editor of the Hollywood Reporter at the time. Johnny Strauss, who came from Wall Street, from a very wealthy family back east,
Yeah.
and he worked on Wall Street with his dad. And when the market crashed or whatever, he was out.
Yeah.
And Ben Irwin, who was a playwright, and also recognized, as one of he had been in theater and everything else, real classy guys.
There was also Strauss.
Cleary, Strauss, and Irwin.
Okay.
Johnny Strauss,
Yeah.
Ben Irwin, and Chip Cleary were
Okay.
the three guys.
Okay.
And they decided,
Yeah.
through a friend, a guy who was on camera at a show at KTLA, who was a friend of Ben Irwin's. When Ben Irwin said they think you'd hire somebody, he said, "You got to hire this kid."
Yeah.
He said, whatever. So they hired me. Now, and I was with it for 12 years, almost 12 years.
And that's when you started dealing with film for the first time?
Exactly. But one of the things that we did, they were the first agency that one of their big clients was United Artists, which was a emerging independent, first significant independent distribution company.
Was this with the Mirishes? Or was this before them?
This is before that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily before the Mirish, they were around, but
Right.
United Artists was distribution, the Mirishes were production.
I gotcha.
The Mirishes, I think, distributed through United Artists.
Yes.
And so, in any event, they were United Artists as one of their clients. United Artists, and I can't honestly remember whether it was my boss's decision or the United Artists executive, could have been United Artists executive, because they had some pretty savvy and aggressive marketers at United Artists at the time. Until that time, all Oscar campaigns or all Oscar nominees or all Oscar movies considered for Oscars were all from the major studios.
Yeah.
No independent had ever even been considered. United Artists started making movies with English companies, with some independents who didn't want to do, couldn't do things with the majors, and they were doing some pretty good movies. They decided that they wanted to do an Oscar, to have their production being considered for Oscars. Didn't know how it would work because of the rules. The rules of the Academy at the time had been developed, and the whole thing was controlled by the majors.
Yeah.
And so they weren't sure,
How do you break in?
But they studied it. I remember that it may have been one of my guys, who who explored the possibilities, how it could be done and considered. In any event, the point is that we handled, and I'm trying to remember the sequence because it's a very significant reason for my bringing this up. There was a campaign that we did on I don't think of the movie, but it's a famous film.
What was it about? Do you remember?
It's a period piece, an English-made movie, independently made in England. I'll think of it too. It's famous. I couldn't.
Do you remember anybody who's in it? I have my.
I'm trying to think of the guy who is an English actor who's still around, believe it or not, at this point.
Let me pull it up. What year roughly?
It would have to be in the would have to be in the mid to late 50s.
Okay.
Tom Jones. It would be Tom Jones.
So okay, a little later. I think that was 63.
63.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the other one, I'll give you another name to see, because I'm trying to think of the sequence. The other movie that I'm going to mention to you is something of Robinson Crusoe. What's the name of the actual book?
The Adventures?
It may be The Adventures, but it had Dan O'Herlihy.
Yeah.
Okay? So you have to check and see which one came first.
I will. I definitely will.
Okay, but the reason is that I bring it up is that until Tom Jones, no movie had ever been nominated, much less won, and it won that year. That had not been produced by a major studio.
Yeah.
So that was one example, and the campaign was totally done by an outside agency.
Yeah.
Never been done before. The other thing with the other one, which is even more significant, that's the reason I think that Tom Jones may have come first, is that we handled this movie, you know, the Robinson Crusoe movie, and where the star of that movie was Dan O'Herlihy.
Yeah.
And at that point, he certainly was not known here. Dan had been an actor with the top Irish theater, the repertory theater was famous. In any event, the movie had not been seen here yet, and we actually rented a theater on Hollywood Boulevard to run it for 1 week because that was part of the criteria for consideration. The movie had to play 1 week in LA at the time. Since then, it could be here or New York, but at that time you had to play for 1 week. We rented a theater on Hollywood Boulevard, east of Vine Street, so you know it was a small theater that could be rented at a reasonable price. If 4 Academy members had seen the film at that time, I would think that was the one. But nevertheless, it qualified. Dan O'Herlihy got an Oscar nomination for that. And it was, I mean, it's almost, you know, it was embarrassing on one hand, but on the other hand, it was acknowledged that his performance was not embarrassing.
But if only 4 people had seen it, then that means the publicist did a great job of talking it up.
Well, there's certain things that one did not know at that time, and even the numbers of people who voted is comparatively little, you know.
Of the membership,
because at that point it was totally controlled by the majors. Bob Thomas wrote, you know, is a guy who revealed it all years ago, an AP writer, whose brother, by the way, was a top publicist in town.
Bob Thomas's brother?
Bob Thomas' brother.
Wow.
So, anyway, what became known, particularly during that period, is that the studios would collect the ballots of all Academy members who worked for them. They'd take the ballots, fill them out, and send them in. And, of course, you know, it was not known openly at that point, but as I say, it's been since revealed that that's what would happen.
And how recently do you think that happened?
Well, in the 50s. I mean, it
ended
just know that by the late 50s, at latest maybe the very beginning of 1960s, the studios were beginning to lose that kind of dominance. And so...
to that point, though, I want to... this is somebody who I'm sure you knew, Walter Seltzer. He had a quote in an interview that he did where he said... just 1 second, because this was... Okay, so he remembered that at a 1939 meeting at MGM, Howard Strickling, the head of publicity, told the 60-member publicity team that, quote, through the generosity of the studio, close quote, they were all members of the Academy. Quote, he had enrolled everyone and paid the initiation fee, close quote, Seltzer recalled. Quote, there was general jubilation and thanks. Then he proceeded to tell us how to vote, close quote. So I gather that this sort of thing, you know, that's why I'm hoping that it's important, though, to just... Aside from Walter Seltzer, I know people say this happened, but it's good to. It's just valuable to have somebody who's an authority who I can point to.
Well, I'm not an authority in that regard.
Okay.
I mean, all that I know about that period was what I have read too, particularly when Bob Thomas and I said we were lit off of this, and I would imagine that you can probably find his columns. It's on the Associated Press.
Okay.
Do you know that until the late 50s, if you work for a studio, if you were a publicist working for a studio, and you were caught in a photograph with a star, and that picture was published in a newspaper or magazine, you were automatically fired.
Why was that?
Because they wanted the public to believe that stars were stars because they are wonderful, they are great, and the movies that they make are great. That's why they're stars. They isn't not because a publicist says they're great, not because a publicist planted a story and you saw it and you believe
They didn't want to see
great.
the strings on the puppet.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what it is. So we don't want any public, we don't want the public to ever see a star and his publicist or press agent. And when independent publicists or agency publicists first evolved, which, what's his name, Henry Rogers was one of the first in this regard, and the story is famous. I mean, you can research it easily. I think it was Joan Crawford that he represented. And the studio was up in arms about it. It was only because, first, she was a rebel. Second, she was such a major star to begin with. And third, it was also closer to the end of her reign there. That they finally kind of went along with the fact that she had hired a publicist. They didn't want her to have a publicist.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, the contract stars could not have a personal publicist. And the main reason for that is they didn't want to lose control of it.
Yeah.
You know, that was it. So when you had that kind of mentality, at first, you know, it's kind of an interesting concept, except that in this day,
you can't keep secrets.
Anymore. Yeah. So, but that was the fact.
And it's interesting you mentioned Henry Rogers and Joan Crawford, because I think that his may have been, I mean, I've gone back through the archives of the trades and the major papers and whatever, and a lot of history books, and what I've found is that there were a few basically for your consideration ads starting in 1935, and then they kind of died down a little bit during the war. But he was the one, I think, that was in some ways the first organized Oscar campaign, him for her on Mildred Pierce, and it worked.
Right. Now, what year was Mildred Pierce?
45. So that would have been sort of the beginning.
Yeah, but I guarantee you that knowing, I mean, I didn't know him well, but I knew Henry Rogers. He didn't do it without, I would say, cooperation. I mean, he was very close to some studio people.
Yeah.
So if he did it, now even though she was maybe having a tough time with the studio, he probably helped, you know, kind of smooth that sort of thing over. And if he did that, he probably ultimately got the okay from the studio to do it as well. Back in 1945, I would think that would be
because it was still
because the only way that the agency I was with was able to do what they did is there was no major studio involved. Period.
I've read, I don't know if this is correct, but I've read that you had worked on the African Queen Oscar campaign. Is that true?
Well, yeah. I mean, The Office. That's The Office.
The Office. Okay.
Yes. Well, this office ended up having an amazing track record with Oscar campaigns.
What was the earliest ones that you can remember?
Oh, God, I mean, it would have to be, you know, I would have to try and figure out what the movies were and then find out which, you know, I've lost track as to which came first at this point.
Well, how about do you remember specific titles or people? Because I can do the chronology, but which ones do you remember them being a part of?
Separate Tables. But again, that was through United Artists.
Yep.
You know, most of the ones that we did, if not all of them, were all independently produced films. Okay. I don't recall ever us during that period of working on a film produced by a major studio. You know,
now, was that because you you represented David Niven, right?
We represented David Niven.
So that's why you would have been.
We represented David. We may have represented
United Artists as well.
Separate Tables through United Artists.
Okay.
We did represent David Niven.
And then you represented Bogart.
Bogart, correct.
And so that would have been the way to African Queen,
right?
Because that was a major, right? That was okay. I forget which.
I don't know whether it was a major, but let me tell you the reason that it was possible with African Queen. You got to put it in context.
Yeah.
this African Queen was at the end of Bogart's and John Huston's careers. Nobody, when African Queen was under production in Africa or whatever they were, John Huston by that time was, an alcoholic, and so was Bogart. And they were actually maybe shooting any worthwhile footage maybe for an hour a day or whatever, I mean, they were dragging on. And it was expected the movie would never get finished to begin with, and certainly would never be expected to be anything special. And when the rough cut was made, everybody's money was a piece of shit, and that...
they thought it was a piece of shit. Yeah.
I mean, nobody had any expectation for it at all, and then somehow or other, I don't know whether it was specific to Houston, but they finally did the final cut, which was decent. It was not that they thought it was great, but it was decent. But it wasn't considered a big hit right off. It's one of these movies that kind of its reputation grew and evolved. So my point really is that which studio was it involved?
I think I don't remember. It might have been Fox.
Well, anyway, whoever it was figured that any attention they could get to recoup some of their losses. Was fine.
Right.
Who did or how the campaign was done. If it had been under total control of the studio, probably would never have happened that way.
So in this case, they're saying if Bogart can get his own attention, it's good for the movie. Just go for it.
Yeah. And first Bogart did his own thing. I mean, at that point particularly, he didn't give a shit about what anybody thought about it. When I covered a few interviews with him. He'd only do it one place at Romanoff's in Beverly Hills, which was not too far from where he lived. And he would he was one of these people who drank, who couldn't hold his booze more than he drank a lot. But he was definitely addicted to it. And so, but he would always never drink in the morning. The big thing is felt he had the discipline because he could hold off, which he did for many years prior to that, when he worked, where he would hold off till late afternoon before he had his first. But once he had his first drink, he was gone. So he would be able to hold out and be able to do the job. And so, but anyway, for interviews, we do interviews at Romanoff's, and he and several other heavy drinkers that I dealt with had a similar pattern. If we had an interview, lunch interview at 12:30, I was to meet him there at noon, and he'd say, "I'm going to have a little drink just so I can, relax a bit, and then we'll have one later." And so he'd always ask me. I was still a young kid too, but. I guess I could hold it as well as he could. Not that I was that close. So I'd have a drink, but I'd sip it because I knew that I couldn't have 2 or 3 drinks and still function. So, but I'd have a drink and sip it, and then the news guy would show up, and finally had his drink, Bogart, and I would say that the news guy, some of whom were equally heavy drinkers too. After everybody kind of settled in, they were talking all this. I said. Should we order a drink? So, okay. So we order a drink, and then I'd have my second drink thing, and I'd hardly touch it, but they would drink it.
And you would be, in a booth with them?
Yeah.
And you stayed throughout the whole interview to make sure they didn't...
I would stay through the whole interview, but he lasted through pretty well. But then at a given point, and he knew better than I, and he had somebody who was going to drive him back. He'd say, "Well, I've got an appointment. I've got to go," and he'd get up and he'd walk out. And but he again had, as far as he was concerned, he had done the job, and the Romanovs people knew his whole routine so well that whenever he did whatever, they loved happening and all this. So he would go and do his thing.
So as far as this specific with what do you remember of the African Queen campaign itself? Was it just basically based on a lot of interviews that he would do, or what was done? Because he never won for Casablanca, he never won for anything else. That was his one Oscar, and you guys were part of it. So I'm so curious. And also, it predates all but the Joan Crawford campaign, as far as I'm aware of. So, what do you remember of specific strategy for that campaign?
Okay. And I'd love to take full credit for it, but I can't.
Yeah.
Is that we had, first, understand that first we had Chip Cleary, who was a former editor of the paper, and he knew how to, get things in that paper, how to structure what the basic better than anyone. Mm-hmm. Ben Owen was a magnificent writer. He could articulate things like no one else.
Sorry.
And so whenever we put together a story suggestion, it was pretty well done for the writer, before the writer even had to say yes or no.
Right.
Because it was very well thought out. There was a purpose and a goal in mind for it. In some instances where we did actual interviews, at other times we didn't even have to do the interview.
You would just provide them
we
with...
provide with information. And it wasn't a matter of saying, run what we do. It's just that at that point, when we gave it an exclusive to somebody, it was a legitimate exclusive.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to worry about whether the same story is going to appear in 3 other papers.
Right, right.
And so, and it was so well crafted that they loved getting this. I'm talking about both Variety and the Reporter.
Yeah.
If an editor did anything to it, it was minor. They would do it just for security's sake.
Right.
And so we were able to kind of structure. That's where it came into. All of these guys mentored me, even during the entire time I was doing with respect to writing. I would do usually the first draft of everything on the things that I worked on.
Yeah.
And then invariably what would happen is that Ben would take a look at it and do a couple of things to it. Then I'd give it to Chip. And Chip, the way he trained me would be the way he dealt with his reporters when he was on the paper. He'd look at something, and initially when I first went to work for him, he told me what a press release needed and how it should be crafted. And he would tell me this a few times. So whenever I give him a press release, he'd look at it, he says, it doesn't fit the whatever. He says, take it back and do it again. And I'd go in there and do it again. And the third time I'd show it the same thing, he'd look at it, and he said, okay, let me show you. You obviously didn't get it. Here's the problem with it. And he'd show me. So he trained me this way. So my challenge constantly was, I'm going to get a goddamn thing released one of these days, and he's not going to be able to say a goddamn thing.
Right.
But the point is that his comments were always to the point.
Right.
And so that publications, they knew how to write a story for the trade paper. They knew how to write a story for a magazine. Every magazine, they knew their style.
And at that point, what were the there was like the confident, like some of them were like tabloids, right?
Oh yeah, well we didn't.
You wouldn't deal with them.
We never dealt with tabloids.
So it'd be Life.
There's sudden Life magazine, Time magazine, Newsweek were around, Saturday Evening Post was around.
Were there, of these early tabloids and gossip columns and things, what were the ones that were most on your radar of things to steer clear of? I've read a little bit about Confidential.
I mean, at that point, I don't think that there were. I don't know which of the recognized agencies dealt with Confidential in its early days. Confidential adjusted its editorial policy as well. But in the early days, we certainly didn't cooperate. It doesn't mean that some of our clients didn't land in there.
Right.
But they didn't land in there because of us. It wasn't a matter of the way publicists often today would use outrageous media.
Right.
Just to get a point across.
And would you cooperate ever with a Hedda Hopper, Luella Parsons, Sheila Graham?
We were tight as could be with all of those. Every one of them.
And so, what would you would give them things? What would they expect in return? What would they?
Well, first, again, exclusivity was everything.
Yeah.
And so that, and we had a relationship. Like, for instance, Ben Owen had a very strong relationship with Luella Parsons. Johnny Strauss, a very close relationship with Hedda Hopper. Mm-hmm. And it worked in, the two-way, because Hedda Hopper she got an item that she thought was, something that was necessary, that complimentary, but she'd call John Strauss about a client of ours, because we had amazing how many stars were alcoholics at the time. And we'd heard, but you could control the information a lot better then. But if she got wind of one, and she'd call Johnny Strauss, he wasn't going to, dodge it. He'd say, at first she knew as much about him,
right.
Your client. The client, as we did. So it wasn't a matter of denying anything, but
damage control.
Exactly. What can we say? What can we do in order to make it a little more palatable?
Right.
What the news is like. The thing that we did at the time, because I still remember that I was a kid in the office. We had an actor, which would happen at the time. So we had one actor whose name at this point I want to not mention, but he lived in Toluca Lake, and the local police station at Toluca Lake would periodically get a call from the local bar or whatever it is. This star was there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he's obviously not going to be able to drive, and somebody's going to need to come and get him because we're closing up.
Yeah.
The office made an arrangement with the police station there that if they picked up this actor, to call one of us, and they'd give him the name and the phone number, no matter what time of day or night, and we'd come and pick him up, no matter what time of day or night, because if they weren't picked up by a certain hour during the night, they had to book him. The police department, I was the person whose name and number they had.
So you would come pick him up?
I lived in West LA, and I get a call at 2:30 in the morning to go down to Toluca Lake to pick up this guy and take him home. And, I wasn't about to say, oh, wait a minute, what are you talking about? That hour, I just got up and drive down there and pick him up, take him home. And we had others, who were not necessarily, neither one of the stars that I did that with.
Yeah. You had multiple like that.
Oh, yeah, I had, one was an actor who lived in Studio City.
Yeah.
Same deal. You couldn't make that deal with a police station today.
No.
But then they did it, and as long because they lived there, there were local people, and the police chief wasn't looking to get that kind of attention, particularly for a local person, and so you were able to do that.
Is it? Do you believe there are stories? I just bought a book about. It was called The Fixers. It was about MGM's guys, Eddie Mannix, Howard Strickling, where supposedly, I think it was Clark Gable killed somebody with his car once when he was driving drunk, and they made it go away, or they got a low-level guy to take the fall for it, and things like that. Do you think that's legitimate?
For some reason, I don't think that it's to that degree. I mean, I cannot believe that the studio could cover up somebody killing someone.
Yeah.
That I can't believe. But I know that they could do amazing things. Back then, we represented Clark Gable at one point, later in his career. But we never had anything like that happen. But yes, they could do amazing things back then. They had that kind of pull because politically they had the pull. And you could make deals like that. You just can't do that. But those guys felt they had Howard Strickling and all that. They felt they had a lot of control, and that was part of their job to be able to develop that.
Interesting. And so, just to jump back for a second to the African Queen thing. At that point, the extent of an Oscar campaign would have been interviews and planting items, because
and advertising,
so something in the trades, because what seems to me to be the next big turning point was 4 years later. You've got Marty, which was sort of Walter Seltzer's claim to fame, I guess, in a lot of ways, because from everything I've read, they spent more on the campaign than the movie. The movie was supposed to be a write-off. It went over, and all of a sudden, these techniques, which are sort of the precursors of what we see today, you obviously couldn't do screeners, because but here he says apparently the Bel Air circuit, they would send a print and a projectionist to any house where they could get 20 Academy members. They would have sort of pseudo events like the Butchers Association honors Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah.
Do you know of anything that predates that, or do you think that was really the beginning of the modern era in a way?
Prior to that period, it was totally controlled by the studio.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of, I'm talking about the voting process.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of, what stunts can we come up with?
Yeah.
You know, because they didn't need the stunts. And they didn't want stunts. You know, they wanted it all to work smoothly.
Except, though, Marty was Heck Lancaster, which wasn't...
It was not the studio.
Yeah.
No, I'm not talking
Oh, you're saying prior. You're saying prior.
The Marty came along post all the other things that I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Because then it changed. I mean, the studios were no longer controlled by that.
So, do you remember any... So that was the first time you think that it was sort of outside the studio, that was a non-studio that was able to break through the Academy?
Well, the first one was Tom Jones.
No, but Tom Jones was 8 years after Marty.
Oh, it was?
So I think,
okay.
Not that, but Tom Jones probably was the first for non-American production. But I think Marty was 55, Tom Jones was 63.
There was something else during the 50s. I'd have to check on the movie.
Well, the ones that won Best Picture in the 50s were All About Eve, American in Paris, Greatest Show on Earth, From Here to Eternity, On the Waterfront, which I guess that was also independent, so that might be.
That was United Artists.
United Artists. Then Marty, then Greatest Show on Earth, Bridge on the River Kwai, Gigi, Ben-Hur, and The Apartment.
Okay. Well, the one thing that, I'd have to look at the list again, is not so much the Oscar winners. I mean, the Oscar winners
The nominees.
is among the nominees to see when those campaigns really began.
Do you think...
Before that, before a certain point, there were no independent movies that ever received a nomination. Okay. So you would have to, really look at the nominations to find out when those campaigns really began.
Just one last thing, if I can. It seems to me that the era when it became a little egregious, just almost embarrassing, and I think the Academy even had to respond at this point, was actually in the mid to late 60s, when truly the studio control was gone, and these independents were emerging. And the year that somebody else has pointed to, which makes kind of sense to me, is 1967, where you've got these sort of edgier, In the Heat of the Night, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, on and on and on, Bonnie and Clyde. And then you have Dr. Dolittle, which is a flop, a big budget flop, but I guess they had so much invested in it that they felt they need to get this Oscar nomination for Best Picture. And so apparently there were 16 consecutive nights when Fox screened the movie for Academy members, followed by prime rib and champagne. Do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
So we were just talking about how the Dr. Dolittle situation, where they did, after all that, they did get their nomination.
Right. Well, first, you got to remember that there was one campaign, I think it took place before that. I'm trying to think of the guy, a supporting actor nominated.
Oh, Chill Wills.
Chill Wills.
Yeah.
Okay. What year did that
That's
happen?
1960.
Okay. That is the first egregious example that came up, and it embarrassed a lot of people, including us, because we're in the midst of this, and in a sense, we were part of the independents who were doing this sort of thing, and we did not appreciate it either.
Because he made it harder for everybody else.
He made it, exactly. He kind of made all these independent campaigns look foolish. Okay?
But was that an independent campaign? The Alamo, was that not a big studio movie?
But his campaign was
an independent publicist.
Had nothing to do with the producers didn't have a role in that.
Bow Wow Wojciechowski, I think was the guy's name, his publicist that he... Yeah. Anyway, sorry, let me let you... Yeah. So, but when prior to Dr. Dolittle, had you heard of things where sort of whining and dining?
Well, no, I think that, I don't know whether there'd been some to the degree that they did it,
yeah.
but I think that by then there'd already been the idea of having a screening and then having a reception that had already begun, except that it wasn't as blatant as that.
Right, you know, flying stuff in from Europe.
Yeah, you know, so that's the reason that ultimately the Academy came up with a rule that you can no longer do that.
Well, they were saying Fox was the worst offender because 1967 was Dr. Dolittle, which probably shouldn't have been nominated. Then 1969, Anne of the Thousand Days, which was approached the same way. And some of these articles from the time started to refer to it as Anne of the Thousand Fillets, which, I mean, it sounds like that was...
Well, let me tell you my own take on all of that. Because the question constantly comes up when nominations are announced or when movies are up for, you know, being promoted that way. And some of them, you know, may appear to be, to any particular person's taste, ineligible. You know, I mean, how can anybody, you know? I think that if you take, I don't know whether I necessarily want to be quoted on this too, but if you take the position that the Oscar is at the very least a combination of trying to recognize, you know, the finest work that is being produced by you know, filmmakers, as well as a marketing tool, you know, because I don't think that you can take one without the other. All right, and I don't think there's anything wrong in taking one, taking both into concern. But my take on that is that as long as the nominees don't embarrass the Academy, you know, because because look, you and I can go to see the same movie, and I'll think, gee, it's a work of art, you'll think it's a piece of crap. But the point, nevertheless, is, when you know, all is said and done, if the nominees are not embarrassing, there's no nominated movie that is an embarrassment to the Academy. Because we have to acknowledge that the tastes differ. You know, just as, for instance, this last year, when they increased the nominations from 5 to 10, and they had 9 nominees. And what happened is that for the first time in years, more than one blockbuster ended up in nomination. But my impression of all that is that the nominated movies, including those busters, were, I would not be embarrassed if any one of them won.
No, I think it's not, I don't think it's that there's ever, it's not like they've nominated a complete piece of junk. I think the thing, though, is just that, particularly in the, just if we're being frank, particularly in the era of Harvey Weinstein, which it really, the last 25 years, where it really got kicked up a lot, than not to a higher notch. And in some ways, I have to say, as an outside observer, in some ways I have to respect it, because if I had a movie that I wanted to, that I made, I'd want my guy fighting for it as hard as possible.
Absolutely. That's why. That's the reason I say that you cannot just focus on you know, the art of it,
right.
Because a movie that is, you know, artsy as can be, and 4 people go to see it,
right.
is not necessarily reflective of a hit. Like when the one thing that I have not gone into with respect to my background is there was several years when I represented a circus. The circus I represented was a Dobrich International Circus, which you may or may not have heard of. Al Dobrich was he was from not Bulgaria, maybe Bulgaria, but from one of those countries, but became an international circus guy who provides the, not the animal acts, but the acrobatic acts, or did at the time for years, provided all the top acrobatic acts for Ring Brothers, for every major circus around the world. Dobrich did that. And he then had his own circus that he also would play here at the sports arena, and play occasionally sometimes in New York at Madison Square Garden. I mean, the greatest circus guy you can imagine, but was never regarded that way.
Right.
He was not that well known,
right.
And he was from Europe, you know. But he booked all the Great Wallenders, were his act, and I mean every great act that you can name that was in all these other circus were his. And so I handled his circus for about 3 years or so. And this was, suddenly middle of my career. He taught me what publicity was all about. Because he said, listen, Henry, and he has ideas, it's not like he's a showman.
Right.
He says, I want you to understand one thing, he said, about what my business is all about. He says, I need an audience at the very first performance. If I don't have an audience show up at the very first performance, because I'm only here for 3, 4, 5 days, whatever it is, I'm losing my shirt. So it's not a matter of, hey, we're going to have a great promotion and all this, and by the weekend, we'll get an audience. If I don't get an audience the first day, it's a flop.
Yeah.
He says, I need that audience there. You understand that? So whatever we're going to be doing, get to that. So he said, well, asking about ideas, discussing it. He said, well, what I want, he says, if it was the Ed Sullivan days, I go put the acts on Ed Sullivan 2 or 3 days before, and they'd mention, they're opening up in Pittsburgh or whatever it is, and we'd fill the place. We don't have Ed Sullivan anymore. So I'm looking at local campaigns, what we can do. He says, talk to some of the states, see if we can get them to do a half-hour show on the circus. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, we'll do circus acts for half hour and all this. I said, Al, how can you afford that? They're not going to pay for these acts. They've got to be union. It's going to cost a fortune.
Yeah.
He says, listen, kid, and he had a strong accent. He says, let the circus be my problem. You take care of the publicity. He said, you get them to do the show,
right.
They'll have them. So anyway, so okay. So I called up KTLA because I knew them well. And I said, how would you like a half-hour circus show for nothing? All you have to do is tape it. And they said, well, are you sure? I said, absolutely. So I go down to KCOP, and I said, but I need it on such and such a night. And I went to KCOP, I said, how would you like to have a circus show and all this on such and such a night? It doesn't cost you anything, because I knew the guy, the programming guy. And he said, well, if you can do that, he said, so we set up him to do a whole performance of the entire circus. One crew, they pick. We're going to do 2 performances. Yeah. One is going to see the show. You pick whatever you want, and then the other guy, you pick whatever one, different ones.
They didn't need exclusivity.
Well, they were going to have exclusive. They couldn't pick this. It was up to them. If they want the same thing, as long as they agreed.
Right.
So we did a whole performance, a circus, all performed an entire show. While these guys were saying, they loved it. Nobody's ever done that to them. And they said, wow, and they were sitting next to each other. You take that one, I take that one. We do it the second they redo the whole thing now, bit by bit, while their camera teams are shooting all that. We do it. We get to the day, because this was taped a couple of days before. The night that the first one supposed to do the show, they do it, then they promote the hell out of it. And the other one does the same thing. And we open the circus and the place is filled. So afterwards, I finally go to Al. I said, Al, how in the fuck did you get all these acts to do? Because I know you didn't pay them.
Yeah.
He said, Henry, you don't understand. He said, those people, the big acts, he said, they make a lot of money. If I'm a flop, that person, they don't get paid.
Yeah.
They know that if we don't do business, they don't get paid. They will do whatever is needed to get paid.
That's great. That's great.
And that's the reason, when you hear about actors, like the worst lines that a publicist can hear from an actor is, it's all about the work. When you say, will you do interviews about personal things that you do? It's all about the work. You hear that from an actor, run for the hills.
Because none of the rest, it doesn't matter unless they're getting an audience.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to do that, you go into your bathroom, take the script, and do it the way you want.
Well, and I've heard the greatest compliments. I read a lot of things to prepare for this, and old books and things where you were quoted. And people, I think that your creativity is what's impressed a lot of people for so long. But I read about the is it the Poker World Series?
Oh, yeah.
What you did with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a poker player, a lousy poker player all my life.
Yeah.
So all that I needed was I got a call saying, would you be interested? And I didn't know anything about, how the poker tournament went.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd heard of some of the guys, and I said, do I get to come there and play with it? Do whatever it says. Anything you want, come on up. And so we did. What I did for the poker tournament, it had existed for several years before I got involved, but it never got any national attention. And so what I did is that I first got it on television, which they never did before. What I didn't do is I had certain rights that I finally did. I mean, not because I knew anything about it, is that a former client of mine that I brought in to help me produce the telecast demanded certain rights.
Yeah.
Otherwise, so he and I shared some rights. I could have gotten all the rights.
Yeah.
Made a fortune.
Right.
Everybody else, the guys who actually did it with my counsel. They said, "Oh, here we go," and I never thought they could.
And all the ideas that it's predicated upon, I've heard about. The nicknames was sort of your suggestion. The what was it? Bringing press to come and watch
and then play.
Then
I created the celebrity. I created a celebrity tournament, not with the World Series, but with the Golden Nugget. Just to differentiate it from the World Series.
So the very last thing is just this. I guess in some ways, one of the things that long after we're all gone, people will still associate you with is the International Publicist Guild, which the question that I have is, where did that idea originate from? Sort of what was the purpose, and what has kept you involved and so integrally involved from beginning through now?
Well, first, I gather you're talking about the awards show, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay, first, get the right title for it.
Sorry.
It's
Publicist Guild Award or International Cinematographer.
It's now called the ICG Publicist Awards.
My apologies.
And the reason is because it was the Publicist Awards before, but we merged into the International Cinematographers Guild. So it's now, they want the guild.
They have to get
that, and which is great because that's, the whole idea of it is a marketing tool for publicists. And the thing that I mentioned at the, I talked at the guild about, why it was created to begin with. And it has to do with the thing that I mentioned about the studios not wanting publicists ever to be recognized. I mean, I'd love to take credit for creating the awards, but it wasn't me. It was these veteran publicists, including a fellow by the name of Russell Birdwell.
Yeah, sure. He had done Gone with the Wind.
What's his name that you mentioned here?
Howard Strickling?
No. Who is it? The publicist that we just talked about let's say the veteran publicist that you
Walter Seltzer.
Walter Seltzer.
Yeah.
He was one of the guys.
Is Richard Brooks or something?
No, not Richard Brooks.
Because he had been the Fox guy at the time we were talking about.
Well, Richard Brooks was not a publicist.
Well, this was a different Richard Brooks, apparently, that ran the publicity for Fox. Anyway, that's unrelated.
But in any case, there were several of these guys.
Yeah.
Gosh, I have the name somewhere.
Yeah.
Who came up with the idea, and what's it? Chuck Moses. Chuck Moses, who was president of the Publicist Guild at that time, but he was the only. Well, these guys were they were no longer studio publicists when the awards were created, but they were created strictly right before the Oscars to bring attention to the work of publicists.
Why did I thought? Isn't it true though? Most of the year, publicists don't want to be. It's like you said. It's not. It's you don't want people to see the fingerprints. So why?
They do.
They do.
Today, publicists want people to know our contribution to the filmmaking, not the filmmaking process, but to the success of movies.
Yeah.
Because even to this day, there's resistance you know, everybody recognizes, nobody has any problem saying editors
Right.
are terrific.
Right.
Their contribution is all important. The writers, although the writers complain they don't get adequate recognition, but the point is that people still say, yeah, writing, directors, the costume designers, you know, I mean, you name it. I mean, there are people who are recognized at the Oscars who have peripheral involvement, you know, and yet they manage to get recognition there. We've never gotten that to this day. You know, they won't do it. So we, you know, do it with the Publicist Awards right before the Oscars, and I think there are publicists who belong to the Academy who are nervous about it to this day. You know, should we really be doing this?
Doing the Publicist Awards.
Doing the Publicist Awards right up against the Oscars.
But by that point, voting's closed. What's going to happen?
Yeah, it's that. But my point, nevertheless, is that you know, I've really grown up in this business.
Yeah.
And you know, I recognize the contribution that we made, and I see absolutely nothing wrong in letting people know. And part of that lesson I learned handling a circus. The circuses have absolutely no problem. I mean, the circus owners saying, we're showmen.
Right. Carnival barkers. Yeah.
We're showmen, for God's sakes. You know, that's what we do.
Right.
And at one point in the movie business, the head of the studio wouldn't mind being called the showman. They don't want everybody else to, you know, to acknowledge that there was anybody else involved. You know. So in any case, that's the reason I've done it, because my fear and the reason I've held on to it. First, can't find anybody to take over, okay? Because they're still nervous. I don't think that a studio person would be able or want to take it over. But there's still that nervousness, you know, and so I've just stuck with it. I mean, my biggest disappointment would be that when I retire from it all, that nobody else moves in to continue, because it takes a lot of effort and you know, determination just to see it through.
And yet there's never been more publicists, right? And there's pretty creative people.
And we have a lot of studio publicists helping me run the thing directly. You know, the studios are involved right now, the publicity departments.
Right.
So I definitely don't want to do anything to kill that.
Yeah. Well, it's quite something to have been at all 50, right?
I've been to every one of them,
and the next 50 too, right? So it'll be
stick around.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been great. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
You too.